I was sitting at the long table in the private dining room, half hidden behind a centerpiece of orchids, when my mother-in-law stood up. She rested one hand on her chair, the other against her stomach, and said it so clearly that no one could mistake it. "I'm 60 and pregnant," she announced. "This baby will inherit the company." The words seemed to echo against the polished wood walls. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Pregnant? At 60? But no, she repeated it again, with the kind of authority only she could carry. I looked around the table. Forks froze midair. Glasses hovered. My husband stared down into his wine like it could provide an escape route. A cousin let out a short, nervous laugh before covering it with a cough. And me? I sat there frozen, my smile perfectly polite, while my insides burned like someone had poured ice water straight through my veins. Outwardly calm, inwardly spinning. Because I knew this wasn't just about a baby. It was about power, about legacy, about control. I didn't speak, not yet. I just tucked my hands under the table, fingers clenched so tight they ached, and watched her bask in the silence she had created. Everyone was too stunned to say anything. That was her way. She thrived on the moments when people didn't know how to respond. And in that silence, my heart kept hammering out the same question. What game is she playing now? Earlier that evening, I had walked into the restaurant thinking it would be a simple celebration. The company was marking another year of profit, another milestone that my husband had worked day and night to achieve. The private dining room smelled of roasted salmon and garlic bread. Strings of lights glowed soft gold against the brick wall. The waitstaff moved quietly, topping off glasses and laying down plates like stagehands in a perfectly rehearsed play. Family filled the room. My husband, his cousins, a few board members who might as well have been family given how often they were at the house. Everyone dressed their part, polished shoes, pearl earrings, ties with tiny logos. I wore a dark dress, understated, because I'd learned long ago not to outshine her. At first, it had all been the usual small talk. Someone asked about the new office renovations. Someone else brought up vacation plans for the summer. My husband squeezed my hand under the table when I laughed at a joke that wasn't funny, the kind of secret reassurance we often shared in these settings. For a brief moment, I thought maybe the evening would pass without incident. But I should have known better. My mother-in-law sat unusually quiet at the head of the table. Normally, she commanded every conversation, cutting people off mid-sentence, steering topics back to herself. But tonight, she let others chatter. She didn't even touch the shrimp cocktail in front of her. She was waiting. Looking back, the signs were there. The way she had called the dinner not as a celebration, but as a gathering. The way she insisted on reserving the head chair for herself when usually she'd sit next to my father-in-law. The way she avoided eye contact with me the entire first course. I had felt a knot in my stomach before I even took my first sip of wine. And then, just as the main dishes were cleared away, she stood up. The scrape of her chair legs sounded like a warning shot. She placed one manicured hand on her stomach, tilted her chin upward, and said the words that cracked the air in two. "I'm 60 and pregnant. This baby will inherit the company." For a moment, it felt like the entire room tilted. My husband's glass of wine wobbled dangerously close to spilling. A cousin dropped his fork with a clatter. Someone whispered, "She can't be serious." But she was. Her expression didn't waver. I stared at her, at the flawless way she delivered her declaration, as though she'd been rehearsing it for weeks. Her lipstick didn't smudge. Her pearls didn't shake. She was a statue of certainty, daring anyone to challenge her. Inside my head, though, another memory played. Years of comments that had chipped away at me, little by little. Her constant reminders that I wasn't truly part of the family. Her insistence that the company would only belong to blood heirs. The way she once looked at me across a Christmas dinner table and said, "You're useful but not essential." And now this. Her child would supposedly solve everything. A new heir, unquestionable, untouchable, born directly from her. The room buzzed back to life slowly, like people waking from a faint. My father-in-law shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. My husband rubbed his temple, as if trying to erase what he'd just heard. Cousins exchanged glances but kept their mouths shut. I could feel every eye flicking between her and me, as if waiting to see if I'd break the silence. But I didn't. Not yet. I only smiled, the kind of smile that hides daggers, because I knew that letting her words hang in the air was more powerful than jumping in too soon. Still, inside, I was trembling. Because if there's one thing I've learned after years in this family, it's that my mother-in-law never speaks without a plan. And tonight, she had just set the stage for a battle much bigger than any of us could imagine. I didn't know it then, sitting under the golden lights with my untouched plate in front of me, but that declaration 60 and pregnant, the baby inheriting the company, would be the spark that lit everything on fire. And as I sat there, keeping my expression calm, one thought lodged itself firmly in my mind. This wasn't just her game. Not anymore. The evening had started so differently. When I first stepped into the restaurant, the air was thick with the smell of butter and grilled salmon. Waiters moved quickly, balancing trays of sparkling water and baskets of warm bread. Strings of lights ran across the ceiling, giving everything a soft, golden glow. The private dining room wasn't large, but it had been chosen carefully exclusive, expensive, meant to impress. I walked in holding my husband's arm, pretending we belonged there. He had been tense all day, checking his watch, adjusting his tie, avoiding eye contact. I thought it was just nerves about the company milestone, maybe another speech he'd have to give. Looking back now, maybe he knew something more. The table stretched almost the length of the room. My mother-in-law sat at the head, of course, as if the chair had been built for her. Her pearls caught the light with every slight movement. My father-in-law sat to her right, unusually quiet, stirring his drink but rarely sipping. Around them, cousins, uncles, a few board members. All of them laughing too loudly, complimenting the decor, ordering the priciest wines without hesitation. I slipped into my seat near the middle, smiled at the waiter, and tried to blend in. My dress was simple, navy with sleeves that hid the nervous tightening of my arms. I had learned over the years not to draw too much attention, not when my mother-in-law thrived on being the brightest star in the room. At first, it was almost normal. We clinked glasses to another successful year. Someone bragged about a new vacation home in Florida. Another cousin pulled out his phone to show photos of a boat he'd bought, though no one asked to see them. I nodded. I laughed when I was supposed to. I passed the bread basket like it was my only job. Still, something felt off. My mother-in-law didn't join in. She let the conversations drift, sipping her water in silence. Every so often, she glanced at me, just long enough for me to notice, before turning back to her untouched appetizer. Each look was sharp, deliberate, like a test I didn't know I was taking. Then there were the small details that only stood out later. The way the chairs had been arranged so that she had the best view of everyone. The way she corrected the waiter when he addressed us as the family and instead said, the company. Even the way she held her napkin, folded precisely into a triangle, never once resting it on her lap like the rest of us. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just me being paranoid, just the usual tension of these dinners. But deep down, my gut was already sounding alarms. Something was brewing. The courses arrived one by one. Garlic shrimp, roasted salmon with lemon butter, steaks that bled onto white plates. People joked, traded stories about vacations and new cars. My husband leaned toward me once, whispering, "It's fine, just get through tonight." I nodded, forcing a smile, though I could see the crease between his eyebrows deepening. When dessert menus were handed out, I actually let myself relax a little. Maybe it was just another show, another evening of pretending. I even thought about ordering the cheesecake, though I rarely let myself. That was the exact moment she stood up. Her chair scraped back, sharp enough to cut through all the chatter. Instantly, every head turned. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't need to. She simply placed a hand on her stomach, lifted her chin, and spoke. "I'm 60 and pregnant," she said. "This baby will inherit the company." The room dropped into silence so complete that even the clink of a spoon against porcelain sounded deafening. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the certainty in her tone, the way she owned the air around her. I remember staring at the lights above the table. how they suddenly felt harsh instead of warm. The smell of roasted garlic turned sour in my nose. My fingers tightened around the stem of my glass until I thought it might shatter. Everyone else was still frozen, but I could feel it in the air. She had planned this moment. Every glance, every silence, every seat around that table had been arranged to lead here. And as much as I wanted to believe I was imagining it, a single thought pressed hard against the back of my mind. She wasn't just making an announcement. She was drawing a line in the sand. It wasn't the first time she had stunned me with a declaration that flipped the air in a room. This moment at the dinner table, with her hand on her stomach and the words hanging heavy in the air, was just the latest in a long history of power plays. I could almost hear echoes of her past remarks as I sat there frozen. The way she once looked across the Christmas table, smiled sweetly, and told my husband, "A wife can be replaced. A true heir cannot." She said it like a proverb, like some kind of ancient wisdom, while I sat right there carving ham for her grandchildren. Or the time she insisted on hosting my daughter's 6th birthday party, only to turn it into a celebration for her favorite nephew instead. The cake that was supposed to have my daughter's name on it arrived with, "Congratulations, Aaron," in bright blue frosting. I remember standing in the kitchen trying to convince my little girl that it was just a mix-up, while my mother-in-law clapped Aaron on the shoulder and said, "Well, he deserves it, don't you think?" It had always been this way. Small cuts, tiny humiliations, all brushed off as jokes or oversights. When my husband confronted her once, she put a hand on his arm and said, "You're too sensitive. She should toughen up." And I did, or at least I tried. The company was always her favorite child. She never hid it. She built it with my father-in-law decades ago, and though he was technically the co-founder, everyone knew who held the reins. Every decision, every contract, every hire had to be filtered through her. And she never let anyone forget that. At family dinners, while most people swap stories or talk about their kids, she lectured us on market trends, quarterly growth, tax strategies. My husband and I once joked privately that she should have married the company instead of his father, but even the joke felt too close to the truth. There were times when I tried to earn her approval. I volunteered at company events. I brought homemade dishes to corporate picnics. I even covered for her once when she forgot a major client's anniversary gift. I ran to a boutique, picked out a scarf, wrapped it, and delivered it to her office. She took it from me, smiled at the client, and never once acknowledged where it came from. Later that night, she told me, "You're useful." But remember, useful is not the same as valuable. So, when she stood up in that dining room and announced her pregnancy at 60, I knew it wasn't really about a baby. It was about cementing control, about ensuring that the company would never slip from her grasp. She had spent years planting the idea that my children, her own grandchildren, weren't truly fit to inherit. Now she was rewriting the rules entirely. I thought back to a conversation just 6 months earlier. We were in her living room, the one with shelves full of awards and plaques, where even the family photos were arranged like a marketing display. She had poured herself a glass of wine and told me, "Legacy isn't about fairness, it's about strength. Do you want to be remembered as strong, or as someone who handed everything to the wrong people?" I didn't answer. I didn't trust my voice not to shake. That was her gift, disguising cruelty as wisdom. Every insult dressed up as advice, every slight wrapped in velvet, and every family gathering turned into a stage where she could remind us who was in charge. The announcement that night was just the loudest, boldest version of what she'd been saying all along. You don't belong. Your children don't belong. The company belongs only to me and those I choose. I sipped my water, though it tasted bitter. My husband shifted in his seat, rubbing his jaw, as if remembering all the times she'd put him down too. Because it wasn't just me she cut. She had told him more than once, "You're a good worker, but not a leader." She said it so casually that it sounded like a compliment, but I saw how it stuck with him. The longer I sat there, the more I realized this wasn't sudden. This wasn't surprising. This was the next move in a game she'd been playing for decades. A game where the rest of us were pawns, moved and sacrificed as she pleased. And as the silence in the dining room stretched, I thought about all those years of nodding, of swallowing my words, of smoothing things over for the sake of peace. It had kept the family gatherings running, kept the image intact, kept the company's surface polished, but it had also brought us here to a 60-year-old woman declaring a new heir before the baby was even born. The truth hit me harder than her words. This wasn't a family dinner. It had never been about family. It was a board meeting, and she had just delivered her opening statement. The room didn't recover quickly from her words. For several long seconds, the silence pressed down like a heavy blanket, smothering even the smallest sounds. Then came the nervous movements. A cough from one cousin, the scrape of a chair leg, the clink of ice shifting in a glass. But no one spoke. My mother-in-law remained standing, her hand resting on her stomach as though it were already a crown jewel. Her expression didn't flicker. She had always been good at that, holding a smile just sharp enough to look pleasant, just cold enough to keep everyone on edge. She let the weight of her declaration hang over us like a storm cloud. I glanced at my husband. He was staring at his plate, jaw tight, wine untouched. His silence wasn't agreement, it was survival. He had grown up in this atmosphere, where silence was the safest response, where questioning her meant years of punishment disguised as lessons. My father-in-law shifted uncomfortably beside her, stirring his drink for the 10th time, though the glass had long been empty. His face was flushed, but he didn't interrupt, he never did. His role had always been to stand beside her, not in front of her. One cousin leaned forward, forcing a smile. "Congratulations," he said, his voice cracking on the second syllable. The word dropped into the silence like a pebble into a well. My mother-in-law's smile broadened, as if she had been waiting for that cue. "Thank you," she said warmly. "This is a blessing. For me, for the company, for the future. Blessing, future." She dressed her words like gifts, but each one was a knife turned in my direction. Because everyone at that table knew what she meant. My children weren't the future. My husband wasn't the future. Only this unborn child, this miracle she claimed to carry, had a place in her legacy. I wanted to laugh. The absurdity of it all, a 60-year-old woman declaring herself pregnant and everyone nodding along like it was just another Tuesday. But I didn't laugh. I pressed my nails into my palm under the table and forced myself to stay quiet. The waiter entered with dessert menus, completely unaware of the tension. He stopped short, sensing the chill in the air, then placed the menus down quickly and retreated without a word. His sudden retreat made the silence even sharper, the contrast between normal restaurant bustle and our frozen table almost comical. Finally, my husband lifted his head. "Mom," he said, his voice low, careful, "are you sure this is safe?" It was the only question he could risk, one wrapped in concern instead of challenge. Her eyes narrowed for just a second before she smiled again. "Don't worry about me," she said. "I've consulted the best doctors. This is meant to be." She rested her hand on her stomach again, her nails gleaming under the light. "And this child will carry forward what you could not." The words stung like a slap. She didn't even veil the insult. She said it plainly in front of everyone. My husband was not enough. By extension, neither was I. A ripple moved around the table. People shifted in their seats, adjusted their ties, lifted glasses they didn't actually drink from. Everyone wanted to look busy, invisible, anywhere but here. No one wanted to be the next target. I took a sip of water, though my throat was too tight to swallow properly. The glass trembled in my hand, and I set it down quickly before anyone could see. Inside, my chest burned, but on the outside, I smiled. Always smile, always appear calm. That had been my armor for years. Then she looked directly at me. "Of course," she said, voice smooth as silk. "Not everyone will be happy about this. Some people may feel displaced." Her eyes locked on mine. The message was clear. She didn't need to name me. Everyone knew. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I let the words hang there, let the silence stretch again, until the tension turned back toward her. She expected me to protest, to break, to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. But I didn't. Instead, I smiled wider, a smile so calm it startled even me, and I said, "If it's truly a blessing, then we should all celebrate." My voice was steady, but my heart was racing. Her lips twitched, just slightly, before she recovered. She hadn't expected composure. She wanted a scene. By not giving it to her, I had taken something back, even if no one else noticed. The rest of the evening moved in strange slow motion. Dessert was served, though almost no one touched it. A cousin excused himself early, claiming an urgent call. My father-in-law checked his watch 3 times in 5 minutes. Conversation limped along, shallow and forced, with long gaps that no one dared to fill. I kept my smile. I lifted my glass when she made a final toast, to the future. I even clinked glasses with the cousin beside me, though his hand shook so badly he nearly spilled. But inside, a decision was forming. I couldn't stop her from playing her game, but I didn't have to sit quietly while she rewrote the rules. Not this time. And as the plates were cleared, and the evening finally wound down, one thought pulsed in my head, steady as a heartbeat. She may have announced her victory, but the real game hadn't even started. The ride home that night was quieter than I expected. My husband drove with both hands gripping the wheel, eyes fixed on the road, the glow of the dashboard reflecting the deep crease in his forehead. I didn't say anything at first, neither did he. The silence between us felt thick, filled with all the words we couldn't speak in that dining room. Finally, he exhaled sharply. "She can't be serious," he muttered. His voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since he was much younger, back when he still believed his mother might one day change. I looked out the window at the blur of streetlights, trying to steady my own breathing. "She's serious," I said softly. "She always island." That broke something in him. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel, not enough to set off the horn, but enough to rattle me. "It's not just about her," he said. "It's about us, about the kids. She just erased them, like they don't even exist." His anger wasn't new, but the rawness of it surprised me. For years, he had bottled it up, tucked it behind polite smiles and practiced nods. Tonight, though, the mask had slipped. When we got home, the kids were asleep, their backpacks tossed in the hallway, their shoes lined up in a messy row. I stood there for a long moment, staring at those tiny shoes, thinking about what his mother had just declared, that none of it mattered, that everything we'd built as a family was disposable compared to the fantasy of a new child at 60. The next morning, the calls began. Cousins, board members, even an old family friend who hadn't been at the dinner but had already heard. The news traveled fast, twisted into different versions. Some people congratulated us awkwardly, as though we had anything to celebrate. Others whispered questions. Was it real? Was it possible? Was it just another stunt? But beneath the curiosity was something else, a shift. People who had always taken her word as law were suddenly second-guessing. If she was willing to make such a bizarre announcement, what else might she be hiding? At brunch with a close friend 2 days later, I caught the looks, the raised eyebrows, the subtle shake of the head. They weren't laughing at me, they were laughing at her. And for once, that gave me a flicker of power. Of course she noticed. My phone lit up with her name one evening, and against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was calm, steady, the same voice she used in board meetings. "You didn't look surprised enough," she said. No greeting, no pleasantries, just that accusation. "I was surprised," I replied carefully. "I just didn't think the moment was about me." She paused, the silence stretching long enough for me to imagine her smile. "Everything is about you," she said, "and that's the problem." The call ended there, but the chill lingered. She wanted me to react, to make a scene, to play into her narrative of me as the fragile outsider. I had denied her that satisfaction, and now she was circling, looking for another way to tighten the net. Meanwhile, my husband grew restless. He started staying late at the office, pacing in our kitchen at midnight, muttering about bylaws and inheritance clauses. "She's planning something bigger," he told me once, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "This isn't just about the company, it's about control. She's testing how far she can push." And then came the confrontation. It was at a smaller family lunch, just a week after the announcement. Not the whole crowd this time, just her, my father-in-law, my husband, and me. The restaurant was quieter, no golden lights or long tables, just a corner booth and the faint smell of coffee. She leaned back against the leather seat, her hand once again resting on her stomach like a stage prop. I've been thinking, she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. When the time comes, I'll need someone trustworthy to guide the company until the child is of age. Her gaze flicked to my husband, then to me. The implication was clear. It wouldn't be us. Something in me shifted then. Maybe it was the week of whispers, the calls, the sleepless nights. Maybe it was the memory of my children's shoes lined up in the hallway, symbols of everything she wanted to erase. Whatever it was, I didn't stay silent this time. I leaned forward, folded my hands on the table, and said evenly, "Legacy isn't something you can manufacture with a single announcement. People see through it. They already are." Her eyes narrowed. For the first time in years, I saw her composure crack, just slightly. A muscle twitched in her jaw. My father-in-law cleared his throat nervously, but she didn't speak. I didn't press further. I didn't need to. The silence itself was enough. She had expected obedience. She had expected fear. What she got instead was resistance, quiet, calm, undeniable. As we left the restaurant, my husband slipped his hand into mine. His grip was firm, steady. For the first time in a long time, I felt we weren't just surviving her games. We were beginning to fight back. In the weeks after that confrontation at the small family lunch, the ripple effects spread wider than I ever expected. It wasn't loud or dramatic the way she wanted it to be. It was quiet, subtle, like cracks forming in a wall that had stood for decades. At the office, whispers turned into sidelong glances. People who had once hung on her every word now hesitated, questioning her decisions in hushed tones. The board members, usually loyal to a fault, started meeting more frequently without her. I caught fragments of conversations from my husband, phrases like succession planning and long-term stability, words that hinted at doubt, the one thing she hated most. At home, the atmosphere changed too. My children, too young to understand the weight of inheritance or company bylaws, still sensed the tension. My daughter asked me one night why Grandma was mad all the time. I tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and told her not to worry. But inside, I felt a swell of both anger and resolve. Because that was the heart of it. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about the kind of world my children would grow up in, the stories they'd carry about who was valued and who wasn't. My husband grew steadier with each passing day. The outbursts behind the wheel, the sleepless nights pacing the kitchen, they began to fade. In their place came something stronger, determination. I saw it in the way he sat straighter in meetings, the way he answered phone calls from board members with confidence instead of hesitation. He was remembering that he had a voice, one that had been muted under his mother's shadow for too long. And me? I found myself watching more carefully, noticing the way people reacted around her. At one dinner, weeks later, she tried to steer the conversation back to her pregnancy, repeating the announcement as if it had lost none of its shock. But the reaction wasn't the same. No gasps. No frozen forks. Just polite nods and quick changes of subject. It was as if the air had gone out of the balloon. She noticed it too. I saw it in the tightness around her smile, the way she adjusted her pearls a little too often. For once, she wasn't the center of gravity in the room. The real turning point came one afternoon when a letter arrived at our house. It wasn't dramatic, just an envelope with the company logo, addressed to my husband. Inside was a note from a senior board member. Short, direct. "It's time we discussed a succession plan that makes sense." Those last 3 words carried more weight than any announcement she had made, because it meant people were no longer taking her story at face value. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my husband, the letter between us. He read it 3 times, then set it down and looked at me. "We're not powerless," he said quietly. "Not anymore." I reached across the table, took his hand, and held it tight. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me too. For years, I had been reacting, surviving, waiting for the next blow. But now, I felt the stirrings of something else. Agency. The ability not just to endure, but to shape what came next. And still, there was the unresolved question. What if she really was pregnant? What if a child truly was coming? Late at night, When the house was silent, that thought crept in like a draft under the door. But then I'd remember her history, the games, the manipulations, the way she bent truth until it became something unrecognizable, and I'd remind myself, even if the claim was real, the outcome wouldn't be hers to dictate forever. The final confrontation came not in a restaurant or a dining room, but in her own home. She invited us over one Sunday, insisting it was family time. We arrived to find the table set, candles lit, her seat at the head already waiting. She placed her hands on her stomach again, a gesture now so rehearsed it felt like theater. "This child," she began, "will secure everything." Her voice was steady, but her eyes darted searching, measuring, almost pleading. For the first time, I saw not just control, but fear. Fear that her words no longer carried the same power. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. I simply looked at her, then at my husband, and said softly, "The company's future won't be decided here. Not tonight." Not by declarations. The silence that followed was different from the ones before. Not heavy, not stunned. Just final, like a door closing gently but firmly. When we left her house that evening, the air outside felt crisp, cleaner than it had in months. My husband exhaled, a long breath that seemed to empty years of weight from his chest. The kids ran ahead to the car, laughing about something small and ordinary. And I stood there for a moment, watching them, realizing that the real inheritance wasn't a company or a title. It was this. The family we had built, imperfect but real, untouchable in ways her declarations could never reach. I don't know if she realized in that moment what she had lost: the loyalty, the unquestioned authority, the image of strength she had spent decades constructing. All I knew was that her words, once sharp enough to freeze a room, now sounded hollow. And as we drove away, the city lights flickering past the windows, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and relief, because the game she had tried to play wasn't mine anymore. I wasn't a pawn. I wasn't even on her board. For the first time in years, I felt free.